Good afternoon. All right, let's try that again. Good afternoon. Welcome to Ignite. I literally was out in the East Coast in New York and realized that I need to be here today. So I jumped on the plane and headed over here. I literally just came in about 20 minutes ago. So, yeah, welcome to Orlando. And I also was dealing with customer work. Anyways, my name is Alfred Ojukwu. I typically do this session with my buddy Joe Lurie. He'll probably be listening into this later on, but I really do miss him. So every once in a while, if you hear me, get down, just think about the fact that Joe's always here backing me up. Unfortunately, he can't be here this year. So, and this exam, we're going to cover 7742. How many people were there for 7741 and 7740? Right, so we went from storage, and now we're going to go into identity. This is going to cover ADFS. Again, my name is Alfred Ojukwu. I used to be a Microsoft consultant. I guess in some ways you're always a Microsoft consultant. I am now a Surface TSP, Technology Solutions Professional, and I cover national healthcare. So I literally deal with devices, mobile devices, Surface devices, Surface hubs, but I still retain a lot of my training knowledge and all the information that I can share with you guys today. So as we go through this, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions. Again, the objectives of the session is to make sure that we cover what's in 7742. There's a number of different ways to prepare for the exam, and we're going to just give you some key takeaways, some study tips, some ideas of what you can do to prepare, and really just make sure that you have information in order to take the exam. We did this exam a year ago, and at that time, the exam was not yet available. I can proudly say that you can walk out of this class today and actually go take the exam. So that's the good news. But it's going to cover Windows Server 2016. I'm going to go over some general guidelines just so everyone's aware. Now, some of you guys may have seen this already. Let's ask the question really one more time. How many people have already been to a certification session while they've been here? So most of you may have seen the general slides. I'll go a little bit quicker through them just to make sure that you guys understand what they are. Again, this is all about knowing the difference between an MCSE and MCSA. Again, the background talks about what they need to know, being able to understand how things work, and being able to access things like hands-on practice experience and just having 1 to 2 years of experience. So if you're an MCSA, you've at least taken one exam. You've had your chance to really get involved with at least the technology and work in that space. Now, in order to get your MCSE, you have to pass at least 2 exams, and then one more exam reaches you to the MCSE exam. So what we try to do is kind of push you towards that path of getting your MCSE, because that really shows that you're dedicated to understanding the technology. And a lot of people ask me, why should I take my MCSE? It really sets you apart. I got a couple buddies that are interviewing now, and the fact that they have these certifications on their resume, they have these certifications in their background, allows them to stand apart from everybody else that's also interviewing with them. So this is a really good chance for you to build your knowledge. It also helps you out in the field. Maybe not as much because, again, practical experience is a little bit different. You'll see that the way we've changed it is it's much more cloud focused. If you remember, a lot of the technologies were on-prem based, but again, Windows Server 2016 sort of takes on a little bit more of the cloud focus. You'll still see many of the technologies in the Server 2016, as opposed to like the Exchange Online or the Azure AD exams, are more cloud focused. This one has a little bit of a mixture of a hybrid scenario, so we'll see a lot of that. And the other thing to remember is that we've gotten to a point where we're dealing with constant updates of exams. So it's, we'll see those updates happen every several months just to keep them fresh, just to keep things up to date in there. And you'll see that new exams will be released in FY17 and FY18. So again, if you were to walk out of here and take the exam based on the knowledge that you have now, you'll probably do fine, but we don't know what's going to change in the next 6 months. However, I can probably guarantee you that much of it won't change, especially for this exam. This is 7742. Again, exam basics, you have 40 to 60 questions. You have about 1 to 3 hours to complete the exam. How many people go in the room and they spend the whole 3 hours on the exam? Anybody do that? Or you just get in there and get out there? Yeah, so it all depends on where you are, right? I typically go in there and take my time just to make sure I get all the answers correct. make sure I'm doing the best in understanding what it is. But if you've been in the space for a while and you understand the technology, it's really easy to kind of get through. Now, what I get a lot is, why should I not go for 1,000, right? And you see at the very bottom it says 700 is passing. Now, 700 is passing. You don't need to have 1,000. If you are a perfectionist, then sure, go for 1,000. 700 will get you past the exam, and that's with any exam that we take. And you'll see that it has a number of different types of questions that we used to go over. Again, drag and drop, multiple choice, not just 4 questions, but like 6, 7. You'll have case studies. Again, this is 2 years ago when we did this presentation, all of that content was new. We've kind of moved past that. And again, this kind of shows you the path of what to expect if you're taking the exam. In this case, we are primarily focused on just getting the base knowledge of the cloud platform infrastructure, which is Windows Server 2016. And once you're completed with Server 2016, you'll be able to kind of move forward and get your cloud platform infrastructure, MCSE. A gentleman came up to me earlier today and asked me the question, do I need, if I have my Server 2008 MCSE or my Server 2012 MCSE, do I have to take the upgrade exams to get to Server 2016? The only exam you have to take if you have either one of those MCSEs is the 743, which covers 740, 741, and 742 technologies, in contrast to the older technologies. So if you are someone that's looking to take, upgrade your MCSE from 2008 to 2012, make sure that you remember that and take the 743 exam. All right, so let's get to the material. Again, in this section, and this is what's unique about this section, it actually only covers 5 different topics, right? So it goes into Active Directory domain services, ADDS. It goes into managing Active Directory domain services. It also talks about group policies. So you can see they're kind of weighted fairly evenly, and then it goes into certificate services, and lastly, Active Directory Federation services, which can be a lot of fun. Out of curiosity, how many people in here consider themselves identity resources, identity consultants, engineers, managers? Cool. Yeah, because this exam focuses on identity, old identity, new identity. It has a lot of ADFS in there. It has a lot of certificates on there. So, as well as group policies. So these are the things that you're going to be looking for as you're preparing for the exam. We're going to go over each section. And again, we have about 75 minutes. So I'll do my best to kind of go through the content as much as possible and try to give you hints and tips about the content. So the first section covers Active Directory. And in this, it really accentuates the importance of PowerShell scripts. Again, if you were in the 740 course, it talks about installing and configuring Windows Server 2016. In this exam, it dives a little bit deeper. It goes into things like, how would I actually go about running the command to install Windows features? And what we've done in this specific slide is kind of include those commands. What do they look like? Because one of the things you need to be familiar with is the PowerShell context. What does it look like when you're actually installing a server? Because they'll ask you questions where it's kind of tricky, and they'll have the same content maybe repeated with very slight differences. And I can't really touch the screen here. But for example, add Windows features, add domain services, include management tools is a typical command that you'd actually use to install Windows Server 2016. They're going to test you on knowing that knowledge, understanding what that looks like, and then adding additional domain controllers. If you need to add another domain controller, what command do you use? So we've listed out a number of those because as you're preparing for the exam, that's what they're looking for. They want to understand that you understand installing Active Directory. Now, how many people are wondering what happened to DC Promo? I didn't think so. No, just kidding. Yeah, so understand the fact that if they're going to ask you questions about installing Active Directory, DC Promo is something that it was available for the older technologies. Now, with this process, you're now really using add Windows features and going forward with that process as well. So the exam, again, and I'm going to always refer back to the exam because, again, my intention is not to necessarily walk you through how to become an expert at Windows Server 2016, but rather how to make sure you understand how to complete the exam successfully. they're looking at the contrast between old technology and new technology, and that's what you need to be paying attention to. What's changed? For example, knowing that you can use the PowerShell command to add recycle bin and other things of that nature. You'll still see questions around FSMA roles. FSMA roles will come up, and you'll have to know exactly what you're going to do with the FSMA roles. They're still there, even though they're less relevant now. That's something that you still want to pay attention to. So FSMA roles, flexible single masters operations roles, are intended to provide the ability to have different servers own separate services. For example, the primary domain controller emulator. These are technologies that we knew from Windows NT. How many people dealt with NT server and the PDC and all that fun stuff? So we have a PDC emulator that acts as emulator. We have the RID master. Make sure you know what a relative ID master is, which basically issues the IDs out. The infrastructure master, which is important for making sure you know what servers are out there in your infrastructure that are running your systems. The schema master and the domain naming masters. Which two? Anybody name which two are global roles? Just shout it out. Schema master. And again, that's what I'm saying. So this isn't new technology. For a lot of you guys, if you're reading through the content, make sure that you just review it and know the difference, because they're going to ask you questions like server 1, server 2, server 3 have a specific role. Now, one example is that you might want to put a global catalog out there. And which server do you not want to put your global catalog on? Infrastructure master, right, because it's also issuing out requests as well. In the infrastructure master. So little things like that are things that you want to know. We put this in this slide in here so that you understand that FSMA roles still matter. And that's it. I mean, it's not meant to trick you. It's not meant to be difficult. It's just wants to make sure that you understand what those concepts are. We also added a few other components that talk about what you need to remember about installing and configuring domain controllers. You have options to upgrade the domain controllers. You have options to do the resolution of the DNS servers. And then also just seizing roles, right? So if, for example, you have an issue with one of your domain controllers and you need to basically seize the role from one of the other servers, you can actually run through that process of seizing that role. Now, we also mentioned read-only domain controllers. Now, read-only domain controllers are something that you'd put out there. And I feel like I'm talking to all the professionals that understand where read-only domain controllers come into play. And they're really there to be able to provide logon, but they're really not there for write information. But they're actually, you can read information from it on a read-only domain controller. So it's really out there as another role that you might want to install in a remote location for people to be able to authenticate and log in with. You also have the option to install from media as well. And here's a few other examples of installing from media where I would actually run the command and say, basically, if I have the image, I can say install from media and point to the location of where that media is and walk through that process. Or configure domain controllers to run, for example, a global catalog server and not be a global catalog server. These little commands that you're going to see, and you're walking through the scenarios, and we'll walk through one of these scenarios at the end of this piece just to see what it looks like. And then also, lastly, just if I'm going to uninstall my domain controller, what's the process of going about doing that? And this walks you through that too. And the next section goes into creating and managing Active Directory users and computers. Now, again, nothing trivial here. We're talking about managing users and computers in your Active Directory. The automation that you have to remember is that you have two different tools that you can use: Active Directory users, computers, and Active Directory Administration Console, the ADAC, right? So know the difference about how you can actually use PowerShell to create users. You can use the ADAC to create users, or you can still use ADUC to actually add users and remove users. But they're looking for your ability to automate the process. What do I need to do to bulk add users, bulk remove users? It's typically going to be, if you get those questions, always remember the Active Directory Administrative Server Center is actually the preferred option because it's a newer technology. Again, another tip, always look for the newer technology to be the answer. They will throw in the older technology to see if you understand it, but it's going to typically be the Active Directory Administrative Center. That might be your option to select. You have options to do things like offline domain join. If I needed to domain join a system, what do I do? You can actually offline domain join a system and then afterwards basically have it, be part of the domain once it's, shipped out to the location that you're using it for. So another one in the ADAC, what we've done is you can see that you also see what we call a PowerShell history, what changes you've made to your infrastructure. If I created an object, if I removed an object, what those changes are. And I can easily take those commandlets, drop them into a script file, a batch file, or whatever to run the process of adding or creating users or enabling accounts for specific rules. You're still going to see CSVDEs. You can see LDIF is still available, and DSAdd, Directory Services Add. All these things are still command line utilities. So if you still get those questions on the exam, know that you can still use them to add and remove users. You'll see that you have options to basically take advantage of things like fine-grained policy passwords. So password settings objects are still a piece of the puzzle where you're basically using the fine-grained passwords to control what users, basically what policies users can use at a granular level. And as well, the piece that we see here, which is new with Server 2016, is the fact that you have time-bound groups. Again, just a concept from what we call the just-in-time administration, where I can basically give you access for a certain amount of time. And once that time is up, you basically are removed from access from that group. Federation services, we'll see a little bit later in one of the slides, and then conditional access. Now, conditional access, how many people work with conditional access on a service standpoint? Again, this is a big piece of what you'll see in the exam. They're going to be asking you questions around what am I going to do with conditional access and what sort of controls are being added in. So things like device registration are going to come up. Things like certificate usage and issuing certificates to specific host PCs or client PCs, and using that as a conditional access to determine whether the user can have access. So those sort of authentication really take advantage of not just that, but multi-factor authentication as a component for logging on. So point here is make sure that you're thinking about Active Directory Administration Center. It's going to be a big piece of this puzzle. I mentioned the TTLs, or time to live, time limited group memberships. Again, this is a way of controlling who has access. So if we take, for example, just a group, we're talking about a ticket generating ticket, like what we call a TGT, and it's based on a short group membership. And then we have the user that needs access to a specific resource. We're going to basically give them access to that group for using using the TTL, time to live option. And from there, the user is going to get that ticket granting ticket to have a specific lifetime to have access to that resource. Now, that service ticket is the shortest of the TGTs and resource local domain groups. And you can add users to the domain using this. These are ways you can basically control who has access. The big piece here to remember is, for example, as mentioned, the FFL, which is the forced functional level. You need that forced function level to be able to control how you can scavenger and thread. You can take advantage of cleaning up group memberships. So the forced functional level is also important. So all that's in there for the time-limited group membership. And also privilege access management, which is another new feature in the platform. So privilege access management, I keep saying new, but these technologies are, I think, since 2016 and coming, these have become something that we've seen and used quite a bit. So this kind of walks you through sort of an example of what you'd get on the exam. User has a separate admin account, and they might ask you, what do you need to do to make sure that the user can actually do the work that they need to? And they have a separate admin account. The admin puts in the request to have the domain admin rights for 60 minutes, all the way down to giving them admin rights to the point where it's going to expire after a certain amount of time. So it uses a bastion force to basically do that, and it has a shadow group membership that's basically removed after a certain amount of time. All that information is logged. You can view that information in your logs. And the important thing to remember is that privilege access management gives you the ability to control access for a certain amount of time, and it's a part of the Windows Server 2016 platform. When you see those exams, they're really not going to test you on the deep knowledge. They're looking to make sure you understand when and how you'd use privileged access management. It's for providing access for a certain amount of time and dealing with shadow IT as a whole. So think about that as you prepare for the exam. We also talk about ways to join a computer to a domain. And djoin was one of those examples. And you can see where we have the ability to run what we call a djoin on a domain controller to do the pre-stage. And that's not a PowerShell, but it's basically a command line utility you can actually use, a command line entry that you can actually use. And you can run djoin on the target computer and point it to like a specific provisioning file, and it'll go through the process. You also can do it through the system control panel, as we've all seen that. If we go to server, we can actually do that process as well. And then Windows PowerShell. We talked about the importance of PowerShell. It's going to keep coming up over and over again. DSC also allows you to do what we call desired state configuration and join a PC to the domain, just in case it falls out of compliance. You can actually run that script. It will basically realize that it's not in compliance, and it generates another script to actually join it back to the domain. So you can see here it uses start ds configuration commandlet, and it can be set to check the compliance every certain amount of time. So it's more of a compliance tool, but also beneficial for you so that you can actually keep this system joined to the domain. So these are options you can use for joining a system to domain. Now, I've shared each one of these with you so that you know exactly there may be more than one option available. So think through those as available scenarios. And the next piece of this is really around Active Directory. What's changed in Active Directory? Not a lot, right? So OUs are still there. We still have the ability to do group nesting. We have the ability to take advantage of group policies. This section kind of covers all of those pieces around, what am I doing with my Active Directory groups and OUs? Now, I won't bore you with the details here, but the important thing to remember is that you now have the ability to still take advantage of, move that out of the way, of what you should know. Know the difference between distribution groups and security groups. Again, distribution groups are typically used for sending emails. Security groups are grouping people together in distribution groups. Security groups are typically used for providing access to certain resources, right? So they actually take advantage of the access control list, the ACLs, as well as that. Know the difference between global, local, domain, and user, which one goes in which, and as well as group nesting. So we see that come up in the exam because they're going to ask you around domain, local, when do I use one versus the other, and how they sort of, interact with each other. For example, can you have a local group and a domain group, right? Or can you have a global group that is part of a domain local group, right? So these are things that when you're working through it, I think many of you guys may have worked with this before, know the difference in when to set that up. And when you're changing from a global to a domain group, remember that you might have to change back to a universal group first before you can actually go back to a domain local group. And that's just one of those things. It's been around for a while. Most of us know that's something that you want to pay attention to as well. We've also put a few of the PowerShell scripts that you might see that you'd use for creating groups. AD groups, AD group memberships, and things like get AD group. If you need to pull information around the group membership, you can run the get AD group members and get the account operators, for example. That just kind of shows you a quick way of doing it. If you're in the exam room and they're asking you around, what's a quick way to find groups? This might be a quick way to find that information. And I have in there also the UI itself, because there's chances where there might be a chance they're going to ask you about the UI. In what place would I specify the group information? In this example, you see you have to provide a SAM account name, you have to provide a group name, and at that point you can provide additional configuration requirements to allow you to take advantage of creating groups. So, all right, so that leads us to our first practice question. So this is just covering section 1. So the question is, you are the administrator for a domain named corp.contoso.com. You image a new server named server1 and want to join the server to the domain. You decide to use PowerShell. You log on to the server and open an elevated PowerShell window and enter your credentials. What command should you use? How many people think it's A? How many people think it's B? C? And D? Right, so if you're logging onto server and opening up, so the way to read this, and this is what and this isn't typically what you'll see in the wording. What command should you use is probably the most important piece, but the piece that caught you is you image a new server named server1 and want to join the server to domain. And you want to add that server to domain. So the first thing you're going to do is add the computer account. You're going to give the computer name, and then give it the domain name. So it's going to be number one, letter A. So add the computer, provide the name, then the domain name of the computer, and at that point it's going to add it to domain. Now we're not all we're doing basically is just making sure we're adding it to that domain itself. And so that's just gives you a kind of quick tip of how to do that. So a couple key tips to remember: PowerShell, PowerShell, PowerShell. I've listed them. We've listed out sort of examples of PowerShells that you'll see. If you have the PowerShell UI, the ISE, just take a look at that and just do a search for ADDS, and you'll find a number of different scripts that you can actually use, test out, and see what those commands are. FSMA roles are still going to be important. DNS still matters. They still talk about DNS quite a bit. And then group types, for example, scopes of different groups. Make sure you're familiar with that. And then desired state configuration can be used to join servers. Just little tips to remember is that desired state configuration is still possible to be used in this scenario. So section 2 goes into managing and maintaining ADDS. So we've gotten past the installation of Active Directory. We've gotten past the basics of using groups and users in Active Directory, creating users and things of that nature. Now the next section, which is the section 2 of this, covers just the idea of what do I do when I'm looking, I'm actually using the servers and actually administering access rights and things of that nature. This is where the security piece comes in, because now we're talking about group managed service accounts. We're talking about KCDs or Kerberos constrained delegations, all the way down to service principal names. All of these pieces now take a deeper dive into what Windows Server 2016 really is about. So you're going to see some of this in 7740, the primary exam for this for the course, and as well as 7743. But the focus on identity and the security aspects and the security components that you see here on authentication will be in this exam. So we've listed out what this section pretty much covers. And so we've also tried to give you sort of a description of what they mean. Again, service accounts, we know what they are. They're used to manage access to specific resources, and you can specify service principal names for management. Again, service principal names become a very important part of this exam. We also see the ability to use managed service accounts. And again, managed service accounts were really cool, but group managed service accounts really has taken off in terms of the industry, being able to use that multiple group managed service accounts in the environment to basically manage access to resources. So we did list out managed service accounts because you can still use those for a single computer. But if you're trying to go across a number of different locations, a number of different servers, you're going to want to use a group managed service accounts. So GMSAs are important. One of the things that we noted in there is to remember, before you begin using it, you have to create your KDS root key, your key distribution root key, which basically allows it to use the certificates it needs to provide access for those the group managed service accounts. We also have, you notice how it says effective immediately. There's ways to do that where you can set it so that it does it 10 hours, because it takes about 10 hours to do the work. And we set it backwards to about -10. So look for those tricky things on the exam. If you haven't had a chance to sort of explore, just group and account creation, that's something that you want to think about. Now, again, I'll mention this for most of you guys. My goal today is to expose things that you may or may not know. Some of you guys have super knowledge in some of these areas. Others you probably haven't touched in a while. Right, so I'll go over some of it generally, but look for the pieces that don't make sense to you and write that down, jot that down, use that as your way of preparing for the exam, because it doesn't make sense studying for the stuff you already know, right? Really focus on the things that you don't know. Kerber's constrained delegation, another example of things that you should be able to utilize. This is basically using it for IS. It might require that for the trust of the computer, so you might use that Kerber's constrained delegation, the KDS, to actually do the, require the trust to get access. And then lastly, the set SPNs. Know when to use that, set SPN minus A, set SPN minus L, and when that comes into play in these scenarios. And then we have virtual accounts. So these virtual accounts still matter. We're still using things like NT service, which allow you to use that across things like databases. If you're going to use different service accounts, you can use that for the virtual account names. And this comes in relevance when you are doing things like, providing a service on a single server so that you can actually log on. Know the difference between when you'd want to use group managed service accounts versus just using typical service accounts. These virtual accounts, again, started off in 2008, and they are basically created or deleted, and you really don't have to worry about password management, just similar to what the group managed service accounts are. The difference is the group managed service accounts actually use the scheduled tasks to actually control those changes, right? So just knowing that you can set the amount of time that the group managed service accounts will be used. For example, if I wanted to change the password every 30 days or 15 days, you can set it that way as well. So there's options around the group managed service accounts that give you benefits over just the virtual accounts. So think about that in the exam. Again, we always think about what's the newest technology out there, and that's what they're going to test you on. We also give you some steps on how to configure the IIS pool, app pool to use things like the virtual account names. And that's going to be for a single server, and you're going to have several virtual account names on different IIS servers so that you can actually take advantage of that. So other things you should know. Know the difference between domain policies, local policies. We talked about that earlier. And then also know the different types of account policies. Now, again, this is something you'll see in your policies itself, your security policies. And I don't know if I can pull it up here. Let's see if it'll let me do it. Probably won't. All right. Let me just pull this over here. If it lets me. There we go. So we talk about local policies and the security options. So I'm just going to jump in here and show you a few of those things so you guys can get used to it. So on this specific machine, you can see there's only two right now because this is a client machine, but you'll see password policies. Know the fact that you can actually, they're going to ask you questions about all three of these. In a server machine, you'll also see Kerberos policies available. And this one, the Kerberos isn't available. But at least for these two, you'll know that you can set these to different values. They might ask you about those values. So be familiar with what that looks like so that you can, when you're taking an exam, you're kind of jumping in there and kind of moving around on this. And then we mentioned in the last section the fine-grained password policies, which include password settings containers and password settings, the object itself. And it can't be applied to OUs, so keep that in mind. And if you need to apply it to an object, to all in an OU, you'll have to use a shadow group. Now, shadow group is a global security group that's logically mapped to an OU to enforce like the fine-grained password policy. So you'd add users of that OU as members of the newly created shadow group, and then apply the fine-grained policy to the shadow group. Okay, and the next, so this is within section 2. We also talk about maintaining Active Directory. So this is, how do I back things up? How do I make sure that they're not having issues? What is the process in doing that? So this kind of goes into maintaining Active Directory. One of the things that we know that changed is the fact that you can actually back up the Active Directory in the sysvol. We give you the command to do that. WBadmin still matters, right? We're still using WBadmin, and we can use that to start. We basically run the WBadmin, run the start system state backup, and then we give it a target location on where that content's going to go. You can put it on a storage drive, but it's also going to include the sysvol itself. It has to be an NTFS partition, and that's where the content's going to sit. So, and some of you guys probably have tools that you do this with in your organizations, but if you were going to do this manually and for the exam, this is the kind of things that they're going to ask you. The next piece is just remembering you can manage Active Directory offline as well. So you can stop the service, you can start the service. This is a change from Server 2012. This is a change from the older technology. The fact you can actually go in there and stop the services, and it will ask you to stop other services as well. So keep that in mind when you're taking an exam, that it's not just about, you can actually control the services and do things from that angle as well. And you can perform what we call offline defrags and maintain that as well. You can also use LDIF-DE or NTDS util. Well, LDIF-DE can be used to manually kick off what we call the garbage collection process, which is basically looking for free space and clearing that out. So that might be something that you'll have to kind of keep in mind as you're going through it. And you can still perform the authoritative versus the non-authoritative restore. Again, the important thing is know the difference between when you'd use one versus the other. In the exam, they will put together a business case or business scenario, and they'll ask you specific questions around, somebody has deleted in an OU, how do I restore it? Are you going to do a WBadmin, restore from WBadmin? Am I going to do an LDIF-DE? So know that you're going to, most likely do a, depending on what it is, you might do a non-authoritative restore because you just want to get that specific file back, or you can go to the recycle bin if you've turned that on to pull that information back about those users and those details. So these are some of those options for maintaining Active Directory. Here's some additional Active Directory maintenance tasks that you might want to keep in mind as you're going through this. So these things are like performing objects and container level recovery. If I needed to do just a container level recovery, I can use NTD util or the restore the AD object. My bet is on the restore AD object because you might want to use the recycle bin to get that information back. And that's if I deleted an object or deleted information, I could actually pull it back. But you have to enable that in your forest. You have to make that available. And this gives you the command on how you actually can do it. If you haven't done this before, set up your Active Directory infrastructure, test it out, just run the command just so you can see what it looks like to set up a recycle bin feature as well. We also listed out a few options around the cleanup metadata on what it does. It's just the idea that it's deleting the DCs from the default OUs and things of that nature. And lastly, configure it to use Active Directory snapshots. So this might be the idea that you have small snapshots of changes that you've made in your organization. We've also listed out the read-only domain controller scenario where you have you're still taking advantage of the DFS. So file replication services, again, is one of those technologies that's no longer available in Windows Server 2016. DFS has been, and DFSR is probably what you'll see quite come up on the exam. So if you're looking for technologies around file replication or data replication, DFS is what they're going to talk about. It replicates information between the sysvol and the different domain controllers. So keep that in mind. You can revert any changes made directly to the ROTC by the administrator, as you can see here, and you can actually, the importance of the ROTC is basically there to determine, whether or not you need to, you have data on there to allow users to, provide, log on successfully, but you can't change information. It actually denies you from actually changing information on the ROTC itself. So read-only domain controllers are one of the things that you'll see on the exam as well. So I'm not going to go into all the detail, but that's something that you want to think about for this exam. Oh, my picture didn't come through. He's busy working. So Active Directory in a complex enterprise environment. This again covers through the other components of the Active Directory. So we listed them out all the way from multi-forest Active Directory down to domain controllers between sites. And we go into a little bit more around forest or domain, what sort of infrastructure you're looking for. Now, again, the reason why this one is, this 742 is such a familiar site content for many of you guys, because this is what we've done for years. It doesn't change that much, right? I'm betting that many of you guys, as NT admins, as Active Directory engineers, you can probably walk in and take the exam and do fairly well, as long as you know what the new content is, right? It's nothing, it's not as trivial as it sounds. It's really just looking for you to understand, what has changed in the technology. So again, that's why when you look at this and it says configure a forest or a domain, there's nothing new about it. You just know that it has to be all, the domain functional level means that all the DCs have to be a certain level, forest function level, all the DCs in the forest has to be at a certain level or higher. And that's how you know what those options are. Now you'd look at the domains and trust location to see exactly what that trust level is. We talk about the ability to upgrade the functional level. You can do that. You have to upgrade that, all the DCs first before you can do any others. And then you're going to raise the functional level, add new features that way. The last thing at the very bottom you'll see is it's the type of trust that you can use. So we talk about the fact you can have forest trust, which is basically you can sharing resources across different forests. You can have shortcut trust. You basically go from one server, one domain to another. That's within a lower domain. External trusts, which are considered non-transitive, as well as realm trust, which uses non-Windows or kernels options. So these are all different things from a forest or domain level that they're going to be asking you about in the exam. So be prepared for that as well. Some additional trust information that you might get asked is around trust authentications. What kind of trusts am I using? Am I using a domain-wide trust? Am I using a forest-wide trust? And then also just things like the SID filtering. If I need to be able to filter SIDs from one domain to another, and this basically prevents them from being able to use the same SID of an administrator in one forest to access resources in another forest, you can basically use that SID filtering to prevent people from accessing resources in a completely different forest. So be familiar with what SID filtering can do and how it can be used. I think we mentioned the types of trust before already, so I'm going to skip that. And this hasn't changed. I'm going to skip this too. We talked about this earlier. Actually, no, this is the just-in-time forest. So this is access from one forest to another. So, so you can create a new forest which only hosts admin accounts. And if you create a shadow user and a shadow group that lives in that configuration container, you can give them access to that forest for a certain amount of time, and that'll give them the ability to have access to those resources using the same technology. So the time to live group membership, which gives them access to that group for a certain amount of time. And then once that time is up, they can be removed from that group and no longer have access. And that's maybe like a shadow admin user. So they'll ask you about that JIT forest as well. So things that, again, nothing new here. Sites, subnets, site links are still relevant, right? Configuring Active Directory sites and services are nothing new. Logically representation of the physical network, nothing new here for sites. Site links, same thing. You can use that for Active Directory replication between domain controllers. The important thing is know where to set that, know how to set that in the exam. And one tip that we'll just mention for this one is watch for scenarios where login times are specifically slow. And that's when you can actually determine whether I need to put a different site or site link in a different location. Again, it's used for login, the ability to have servers talking to each other, as well as speeding up the ability to log into systems. Okay, so second practice question. You're the administrator for corp.contoso.com. Your company password policy states that the user must change their password every 60 days. However, a new security policy states that the members of the legal department should be required to change their password every 30 days. You need to ensure users of the legal department are required to change their password every 30 days. You must accomplish this with the least amount of administrative effort. What should you do? A, create a child domain named legalcorp.contoso.com, add the user to the new domain, change the default password policy to specify 30 days. Anybody think that's that? So, and then B, create a new organization, OU, named legal, add the user to create a new group policy, object GPO that sets the password policy to 30 days. And again, this is the type of the question you're going to get on the exam. It's not, it's very long. You're going to have to basically read the details. Create an OU named legal, add the user legal OU, create the password setting object with the proper settings, and link it to the legal OU. So you're trying to get to a point where you can actually, sorry again? Has to be B? B. The least amount of, so the password settings object can only be applied to groups, not to OUs, right? So it's only going to be applied, you cannot put, so it's not going to be C, right? It's going to be D. Right, so I can create a new security. We didn't get to that, so I apologize. Create a new security group named legal. Add the user to the legal security group, right? Again, and then create a password settings object with the proper settings and link it to the legal security group. And because you can only be applied to group, that's one that matters. That's the one I'm going to look for because I'm applying it to a specific group. And then password settings object is going to be applied to those specific users. So quick tip on this section, group managed service accounts still matter. Know how to set those up, not how to configure that. You're going to use that quite a bit. Active Directory users computers, know the difference between ADAC and ADUC. It's going to come up. And lastly, know how to configure site links, subnets, and any sort of replication traffic. FRS is no longer available. DFS or distributed file systems or DFSR are also available now. So that's what you want to look for in the exam. The third section covers creating and managing group policy objects or GPOs. Again, I'll probably restate this. This isn't new technology, so I'll skip through some of this to get to it. We're just talking about ADMX files. The fact that you still need ADMX files, you're going to use ADML files as well, which are the language files. You need both of those available, and they're stored in the system root sysvol location. You're going to have options to use starter GPOs, right? So it basically functions like a template that you can start off with, set it to a specific OU, and you can use that to create, group policies for specific OUs. And just the thing to know about group policy processing is, as we mentioned, it's going to go from local to site to the domain to the OU. So depending on where you set it, that's what they're going to be testing you on. They're going to ask you questions around where, if I removed access at a certain level in the OU, does that GPO still apply? And those are the things that you'll have to kind of know is where can I block GPOs from and where can't I? Loop wrap processing might be something that comes up, and then also just how to manage those slow link processing requirements. And I give you a location of where to set that option in the computer configuration itself. We talk about managing group policy objects, how you'd actually do it. And also give you a link about how to just open the migration table editor. And this is just group policy objects. Nothing new here. Key thing to remember that we added in here is the backup of the GPOs, importing GPOs, managing, copying GPOs, and restoring GPOs. These are all commands that you're going to use if you're having to manage GPOs in your organization. So things to know about in the exam. What is it? First point is the group policy infrastructure status, being able to find the status of your infrastructure. And this came with Server 2012, and it was added to the group policy management console where you can actually see what the status is. If some other infrastructure, if there's any issues related to group policies, you can actually see the details. And we also mentioned why do you need it? Because of the fact that you can actually see if it's actually getting replicated to those locations that need it, as well as you can run specific GPOs for domains or any issues that it needs in the actual domain itself. So here it lets you see the status of those group policy. That's important. So one other thing to remember in the exam is this comes up as well. And then the group policy processing, which is basically the order in which it actually goes about processing those requests all the way down to forcing a group policy. There's a lot in this exam, but it's not new information. If you guys do this work already, it's easy for you. I'm just going through some of it, and if you do have a question, we can stop at any one of these. I have a few more slides, so I'm going a little bit quicker than I typically want to go. We saw this one earlier. This is just, again, talking about resultant set of policies, the ability to find information around what policies are being applied if I were to turn on a set of group policy settings. And GP results and RSOP know the difference between the two, and when you would run one versus the other. One generates an HTML file, and the other one generates that opens up in an MMC where you can actually see those policies in terms of what's being applied in those systems. Group policy settings also are challenged. You're also challenged in group policy settings in exams. So things like, if I need to push software installations, again, many of us may not use many of these, or dealing with folder redirection, all part of the group policy settings because these are additional features that come with group policy. Be familiar with it. If you haven't heard of these, read up on what they can do. The fact that you can actually use that to configure scripts, you can use that to administer templates and things of that nature. We kind of talk about software installation. How would I use group policies to install software? The fact that you can actually leverage MSIs to do that and deliver it down to a system, and it's actually going to show up in the add remove programs for the users. This is another way of controlling the ability to push software. Would we typically use this in a large environment? Probably not. Many of us probably have something like SCCM or some sort of package policy delivery process, or even Intune to deliver content. So, but for the exam, be aware that the software installation can be done through group policy. And exam tip has been written at the bottom. Assigning creates a start menu icon and installs the software. When the user clicks the icon, publishing makes it available in the control panel program. So if you assign it, it allows you to install it. Publishing it allows it to show up in the app whiz or the control panel programs. You can actually see that it's been installed in the system. So we give you those two options. You can deploy it to computers or you can deploy it to users. Again, this is a slick feature to have in group policy settings. These are the options that are available. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, make sure you're familiar with it. And then we also listed out each one of the INF files that are part of the common group policy settings. These are security templates that you might want to apply. These are all the default templates that are available. And they really don't take effect until they're imported into the GPO itself and linked to the GPO. Then you can determine whether or not you want to have a high security INF file, a secure workstation, domain controller security INF file. These are all different baseline security templates that you can use to set certain policy levels on your environment. We mentioned the different sort of group policy settings as well. Folder redirection, where you can actually redirect folders and set those values in the user object, or scripts. As I mentioned earlier, you can use scripts to actually control log on and log off settings, and we're seeing a lot of that come up now that we're trying to automate the login process as well as run specific applications. The scripts are going to become much more useful, but just know that they're part of the group policy settings as well. And then administrative templates. Again, another piece of the puzzle that allows you to basically take advantage of setting the group policy settings and making it part of your group policy configuration. So the administrative template is just an extension of the group policies and allows you to set additional controls for group policies. You can even create your own group policies. I think back in the day, some of us actually used to write these group policies and put them in there for usage. As long as you knew where the HKey location was or the HKCU location, you could actually do that as well. Group policy preferences, or GPPs, allow you to configure sets, do additional configurations on things like, configuring printer preferences, custom registry settings, IE settings. This is a little old school, but it's still there as an option to, set what the user can do at an item level targeting, or even if you wanted to, like a shortcut deployment. These are much more detailed processes. All right, so I went through that section, GPO. I wanted to get through that. So this one talks about, again, you are the group policy GPO administrator for Contoso.com. Contoso has a mix of Windows 7 and Windows 10 systems. All computers are in the Workstation OU. There are several GPOs linked to the Workstation OU that must be applied to all workstations. You have been asked to create a new GPO that applies to all of the Windows 7 systems in your company. You need to accomplish this with the least amount of administrative effort. Notice that they keep saying you have to do it with the least amount of administrative effort, meaning that many of these might be right, but there's only one that's, you know, maybe more correct than the others, right? So we have to figure out which one that is. So I'm not going to read the whole line this time. How many people? A. So, yep, so WMI filter says who will apply the GPO, not who is filtered out of applying the GPO. So A is it, right? So I create a new GPO with the required settings, create a WMI filter for Windows 7 systems, and link the WMI filter to the GPO, and link that GPO to the workstation OU. And that way, you'll be able to achieve the ability to control where that GPO applies. So for the GPO section, things to remember. Know where the ADMX central store is, Active Directory, where you're storing your policies. Also, be familiar with the group policy preferences and what those sort of things control, like printer preferences, scripts, registry settings. You can have a little bit more granularity in group policies using GPPs. The fact that you can use group policies to do software installation. Know that, keep that in mind. The fact you can use it to start up log off and log on scripts. They might ask you specifically on the scripts, but they're really just looking to know that you're going to use it for something like that. And then lastly, group policy management console. Know the difference between RSOP, resultant set of policies, and GP results. Which one gives you an HTML, the other one opens up an MMC. The next section is the certificate services. This is the last two sections, certificate services and ADFS. Probably the one that most people are less familiar with. And this one talks about Active Directory certificate services, how you'd set up your infrastructure. And ironically, you need ADCS to use ADFS. So you have to set up your certificate services before you do ADFS. So if you are a security admin, if you are an Active Directory admin, certificate services is something that you should have a decent idea about and how it works. So we talk about the different types of certificate services where we have a CA. We might have a standalone CA or a root CA, depending on what you're looking to put in place. And the fact that they always require Active Directory. You cannot have it, sorry, not always requires. Enterprise CAs require Active Directory. Standalone CAs do not, right? So you can install in Server 2016 as well as Core, but you can't install the Nano. With Nano is that new technology that we see with Server 2016. And the other pieces on there, you can see the different roles that you can have. So if you're walking through the wizard and you're setting up a certificate services, you'll see that you can build a CA, which is your certificate authority. You might want to install the web enrollment server where you can actually go to the website and use that for certificate requests or certificate verifications. The online responder, which sends back a signed response containing the status information, as well as a network device enrollment services. If you're dealing with mobile devices and you're having to use an Endes server, you can set it up that way. So those are 4 different types of certificate services that you might want to use. Then we give you a quick command on how to do the installation using PowerShell. Install Windows Feature AD certificates. Then the other pieces that you kind of see is know the difference between what a curl is or CRL. How many people deal with certificate revocation lists, right? So they can be fun, they can be a little bit stressful, but they will ask you about them on the exam. If you haven't had a chance to look at what a certificate revocation list can do and how it's set up, it's a web-based procedure, as you can see here. You're basically using your certificate authority to create a location by which you can validate whether that certificate is valid or not. And then as well as just know what you can do to back up your certificates. So we talk about Cert util, backup database, backup the key, and then the restore process if you need to restore it to a different server. For example, if you're going from a Server 2012 server to a Server 2016, you might want to back up that information and restore it to a Server 2016 server. And then I also mentioned the standalone certificate authority, where it doesn't require Active Directory. You can see that all requests are pending until they're actually approved, whereas in the enterprise, all the domain controllers act as a certificate authority and they can do the approval. So managing certificates is the other side of this as well, which kind of walks you, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can see here you have certificate templates, the fact you can do certificate renewals, and enrollment as well. We've listed out the different types of scenarios of managing certificates that they're going to look for you to understand. The fact that you can use a certificate template to build a certificate, and then it also shows you exactly where you can set up your certificate auto-enrollment so that they're always re-enrolling the certificates, as well as key recovery options. All right, I went through that section kind of quick because time is ticking. So here's the question. You are a security administrator for Contoso.com. Contoso has an enterprise CA named CA1. You need to delete a certificate from the certificate store on CA1. What should you do? And who said A? How about B? Anybody going B? C? And D? D. So the thing to remember is view del store is the command that you actually use to delete certificates from the certificate store. So you won't revoke it because revoking basically says I'm not going to accept it. Deleting it actually removes it from the store. So little things like that is kind of know the difference. Obviously, dump allows you to dump and see those certificates, and then delete roles, just deleting the content there. And most of the time, all of the exam questions will be actual questions. They'll actually be actual answers, not questions. Actual answers. It's just one is right. They're not going to give you something that's that doesn't exist. They're going to give you an actual value that could or could not be right. So in this section, just know the difference between a standalone CA and a enterprise CA. Know that you're going to use curls or CRLs for in a distribution point in IIS, as well as it needs IIS to actually validate that request, as well as knowing that it can be installed on server core, but not Nano. Nano doesn't support it right now, at least the time we were writing this presentation. And the last section is implementing identity and federation and access, which is really around ADFS and what's changed in ADFS. A lot of people, I find, this is the section that they're most interested in the exam because it talks about federation and when you'd actually use it. In this section, they really are testing you on understanding what you can do from an upgrade perspective, dealing with relying party trust, and things of that nature around taking advantage of things like authentication, claims authentication, as well as leveraging it for multi-factor authentication scenarios. So the section is very detailed. It starts off talking to you about just the idea of doing the installation of ADFS. Again, you would have already done the certificate requirements, set up your certificate server, and then knowing the difference between what your farm behavior level is at 2012 and whether or not you can actually use it to you can install server 2016. So you can add a server 2016 server to a 2012 farm, but you're going to eventually have to upgrade those systems. So you can see here we talk about running it in mixed mode where you can add a server 2016 server, and you just won't be able to take advantage of what we consider the farm behavior levels, which include things like simply just testing them out. But the important thing is that ADFS itself can be installed on server 2016. It's where things are going today. It walks you through the process of doing the installation. Now, we kind of give you a migrations workload because, again, in the exam, you might be asked to walk through this process and order it in a way that makes sense. So in this scenario, we see farm behavior levels. We're going to install ADFS Server 2016, do the configuration wizard, join it to the existing farm, and then sync the property information from the primary ADFS server. And at that point, we're basically marking that as a primary computer. And then from there, we can configure things like the web application proxy and running it for AD prep, forest prep, and domain prep, because you need that as well. And then you can raise the farm behavior level, because at that point, you would have moved the role over to the Server 2016 box. So this kind of gives you a step-by-step process of how you upgrade it from 2012 to 2016. So just in case you're in the exam room and they're asking you about what do you need to do to take advantage of farm behavior levels. This is probably what will walk you through that. So be familiar with what that is. Also, in the server itself, once you have it set up, you're going to have to know what the claims and the claim rules are, and the fact that you can actually use claims or claims-aware apps to actually provide access to resources. So these are things about, we talk about the different objects that are in Active Directory. These are claims that are made about specific users that it needs to validate before they get access to resources. And those claim rules are basically determining whether or not they're going to be allowed or denied access to those resources. Then lastly, relying party trust is basically the idea that you have some sort of trust between the application of choice and the resource, the claim that's being made, to ensure that you have access to those resources. And what's been added here is a PowerShell script that basically shows you how to create an ADFS relying party trust, so that you know exactly that if they need access to a specific set of servers or services, there's a trust in place that will allow it to validate that they need access. So additional info to keep in mind is just enforcing policy settings for relying parties. We can create templates. You can create these via templates. So access control policies are all in place right in the Active Directory Federation server. And you can also, there's a lot of auditing enhancements that have been added into 2016, basically logging information. If you did a search or PowerShell command and ran get ADFS properties, you'd be able to get information around what's being run on the servers. And lastly, just configuring authentication policies. So this has been an enhancement as well, because now you'll see that you have integration with multi-factor authentication, forms authentication, Windows authentication, as well as certificate authentication. These are all different ways of dealing with multi-factor authentication and single sign-on to improve the options around conditional access, whether a resource or user or a device has access to a set of resources internally. And you can set this globally across all applications or at a per application level. You typically can use PowerShell to do that. As you're doing some work, and I think at the end what I'll do, if we have some time, is I'll show you some reference points of where you can do some of the testing on your own and get up to speed on some of this content. And here we go into a little bit more detail on multi-factor authentication. It'll ask you for MFA and previous logon options. You can integrate multi-factor, the Azure MFA, as well as integrate the MFA on-premise into ADFS and take advantage of it so that it actually redirects the user to the MFA server, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, requiring them to provide additional forms of authentication. So that's integrated into ADFS. You will be tested on that as well. Device registration also comes into play. In other words, is this device known in the infrastructure? So we have two different types of registration that come up in ADFS, whether or not the device is actually a domain joined device and has an object in your internal Active Directory, or if it's an object that's been registered in Azure AD and takes advantage of device write-back, which ultimately then takes the registration information in Azure AD and actually adds it to the device registered container on the on-premise network. So these are ways that you can actually use MFA for conditional access and control whether a user has access to a set of resources. You can use Azure apps. For example, Office 365, we talked about that, and walks you through how you'd actually use that. So you set up Azure AD, create the ADFS farm, and then you can set up the Azure AD Connect with the custom path to the ADFS and Azure AD to access those resources. The last portion of the ADFS component is the web application proxy, which also allows you to set this up on maybe the DMZ or a set of web applications, web application proxies, one on the DMZ and one on the internal network, that is used for providing access to application, but acts as a proxy. Many of us are probably familiar with Azure AD Authentication Proxy, which kind of is the modern or the newer way of managing Azure AD Application Proxy, which is a modern way of managing access to resources at an app-by-app level. But the WAP server is still required when you're setting up your ADFS server. So in this exam, you still will be asked about the web application proxy and its role. In the web application proxy role, all it's intended to do is provide access, secure remote access to a set of applications. And you're going to specify those applications so that when that user or that resource comes through, it basically can do the proxying on behalf of the user to the ADFS server. It allows you to not have to expose the ADFS server to the external network, and the web application proxy acts as the quote unquote proxy. Some of the new features, as we mentioned in the Server 2016, is you can use wildcard domain publishing, not publishing, publishing of apps. You can do HTTP redirects from HTTP to the secure HTTP, and you can also publish HTTP. So these are all part of what's new with the web application proxy. They don't spend too much time on. From what I've understand is it's really around ADFS. They may not spend too much time on understanding the details of web application proxy. You might end up doing that on one of your projects. But for the exam, just know that the web application proxy itself is intended to act as a first line of defense for the ADFS server. You can publish applications through it and use that as a way to access resources. Simple thing here, kind of walks you through installing the Windows features for web application proxy, what you'd have to do to install it, and some of the prerequisites, the fact you have to have certificates, you have to have DNS, you have to configure some sort of load balancing if you're going to have more than one web application proxy in place. And the fact you can either use Server Manager to install it or PowerShell to install it. And you can launch it, you can launch it through Remote Access Management, or you can select just the Web Application Proxy Configuration Wizard and see the details of the Web Application Proxy. And in other authentication modes, we can see the details here in password authentication, as well as ADFS pre-authentication, are all different ways of providing access to those resources. And so what we did here is just kind of draw this out so you can kind of see what that looks like. From what can be published, to talk about the different applications that can be published through the web application proxy, as well as the URLs that are used. Each of them have their own URLs. Now, the last piece of this is the RMS, which Rights Management Services. It's just a small portion of the exam. All they want to know is that you're going to use RMS for, that you know that RMS might be an option when it comes to setting up a set of services. So you have an RMS server for only licensing. You have an RMS server for connection points, so it requires like the EA membership to be able to do it, and all the way down to configuring exclusion policies. Again, just from my knowledge and what I know about the exam, the RMS is, it's not overly emphasized. But you still want to make sure that if you're not familiar with RMS on how that works, make sure that you kind of read up on that as well. And lastly, practice question. This is the last practice question. So you are the administrator for Contoso.com. Contoso is doing business with several other companies. Man. You have a server named ADFS1 that runs the Active Directory Federated Services role. One of the relying parties has mandated that all Contoso users are authenticated using both certificate authentications and Windows authentication. You need to configure this on ADFS1. What should you do? And feel free to just shout it out if you know it. Right, so one of I heard C and I heard global authentication. I'll give you the clue here. You have one of the relying parties has mandated that all Contoso users are authenticated using both certificate authentication and Windows authentication. And the key here is that it asks for all authenticated users, and the only one that gives us that ability is the global authentication policy. So that's, that would be it. So that covers all 5 sections of the exam. Again, this is just a deeper dive in from 7D, 740. If you walk through and do 740, you're pretty much good. But as long as you know Active Directory and know ADFS, you can walk in and do this exam pretty much with just knowing the new features and knowing the basic concepts that you may have already done in the past. So again, I just wanted to make sure that we spent some time and covered that. Most of the exam certification courses are going to be, all of the exam certifications are in here. So rather than saying, run around and there's labs for this, and I believe if you're going to take the exam, you can actually go across and take the exams here. Hopefully you guys are, how many people are planning to get their MCSE while they're here? Anybody? How many taking at least one exam? All right, how many taking 0 exams? Oh, that's awesome. And I believe there are discounts for those of you guys that are at the 0 level. If you are interested, just ask around and they'll get you situated. Anyway, I wanted to make sure we went over 742, and I really appreciate you guys for sitting through the whole thing, and I hope you guys have a fun rest of Ignite.